Hello and welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. That would be me. The title of today's episode, Senator Rand Paul versus Dr. Anthony Fauci. That's right, there's a big hearing in the Senate tomorrow in which Anthony Fauci will be grilled by Senator Rand Paul as well as Senator Ron Johnson, about whom I have some things to say. But in today's broadcast, unlike yesterday's broadcast, I will do my best to avoid the use of colorful language. Yes, as I learned about the Fauci diaries and thought about the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic claimed at least 17 million souls around the world, I resorted to quite colorful language. I don't apologize for that because I think colorful language should be used in connection with mass murderers, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more measured in my use of language today. So, with that, we will begin with the simultaneous sip. Yes, I have some wonderful Peet's coffee here. It is, as usual, a cafe Americano with a little bit of room for cream and some honey, because we all need a little sugar with our caffeine, don't we? Okay, let's get ready. Hopefully you have your beverage of choice ready. Let's go for that simultaneous sip. Here we go. Ah, so wonderful, so wonderful. You know, I don't usually use colorful language. I don't usually swear like a sailor, but in yesterday's broadcast, I thought it appropriate to do. So you can only imagine my surprise when I was on the phone today with some Hollywood types to find out they had watched that broadcast. Now remember, we're talking about Hollywood, which loves colorful language. So as I was apologizing to them for my use of colorful language, they were saying quite the opposite. They were saying, no, we really enjoyed it. We think you might make a great on-air camera personality. So remember, boys and girls, try to avoid the use of colorful language. But if you do engage in it, sometimes it might work out, because there has been interesting research which says the more a person swears, the smarter they appear to be to other people. So maybe I'm taking the wrong tact in avoiding the use of colorful language. Maybe every 10 shows, I should just say, this will be the colorful language show. And then maybe some people will think I'm smarter. So you never know exactly how you're hitting people. But as always, I encourage you to be genuine. Just be who you are. If you feel like the situation calls for the use of colorful language, you should use it. Which reminds me of a story of the first time I used the F-bomb. The first time I used the F-bomb, I believe I was around 13 or 14 years old. My brother was driving his Toyota Land Cruiser. My mother was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back with our dog, Bogey. Bogey was a mutt, okay? He had lots of problems. One of the problems that Bogey had is that he really didn't like being in cars. And so there I was, sitting in the back of the Toyota Land Cruiser Jeep with my dog Bogey, and Bogey threw up. That's right, dog vomit was all along the back of the Toyota Land Cruiser where I was sitting. And so, because I was in a car with dog vomit, which was sloshing along the floor, I said, OF. To which my mother, being an English teacher, said, Ken, why are you using that language? And I said, Mom, words have a value. If I can't say the F word when I'm in the back seat of a car with dog vomit, that word has no value. To my mother's credit, she thought about it for a minute, and then she said, yeah, okay, I get it. So perhaps there are times when colorful language is appropriate, whether you're dealing with dog vomit in the back of your Jeep, or when you are contemplating the worldwide murder of 17 million people. So no apologies for all the F-bombs I dropped the other day, but I'm going to try to do a little bit better today. Today is more of the PG version. All right, so Senator Rand Paul versus Dr. Anthony Fauci. So in light of the Fauci diaries, which had been released yesterday, thanks to the hard work of Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who found that Anthony Fauci had written these diaries on many government servers. I believe there were at least 7 or 8 servers that they found various parts of this diary that he had written. Just another example of the underhanded tactics of people like Dr. Anthony Fauci. Have I mentioned before that I believe after a trial in which he is given adequate legal representation and found guilty, then I believe Dr. Anthony Fauci should be hung by the neck until dead, like the architects of the Holocaust after the Nuremberg trial. Remember, the Holocaust killed approximately 6 million Jews. I don't know about your math, but in my math, 17 million people is just a little under 3 times 6 million people. So if the architects of the Holocaust were hung by the neck until dead because of what they had done, I believe that Dr. Anthony Fauci, after a proper trial and conviction, should be hung by the neck until dead. It is really my hope that the entire world sees Fauci for who he is, because as his diaries suggest, he was in love with his own fame. And as I told you yesterday, I have been chasing Dr. Fauci for his crimes against science since my 2014 book, Plague, co-written with Dr. Judy Mikovits. But going back to the latest revelations from the Fauci diaries is this article from Breitbart. Fauci, CNN condemned small household gatherings week before Fauci Tapper dinner. That would be Jake Tapper of CNN. So on the second page of this article, which says, here's what Fauci himself said in mid-October about that year's upcoming Thanksgiving gatherings. Quote, I think given the fluid and dynamic nature of what's going on right now in the spread and the uptick of infections, I think people should be very careful and prudent about social gatherings, particularly when members of the family might be at risk because of their age or underlying condition, the 79-year-old said. Namely, you may have to bite the bullet and sacrifice that social gathering unless you're pretty certain that the people you're dealing with are not infected. However, Dr. Fauci, like California Governor Gavin Newsom, who instituted some of the most severe lockdowns in the entire country, then went to the French Laundry, a fine restaurant that I've eaten at before. But I didn't eat at it during COVID like Gavin Newsom did. But, so the following week after he said that, which was October 23rd, 2020, he wrote, "Had dinner in my home with Jake and Jennifer Tapper. Relaxed, good time. Jake clearly believes that Trump is totally nuts. Hit 83,000 new cases today. The single day record since the beginning of the outbreak. Surge continues." So there you have it. Anthony Fauci telling you not to have social gatherings, but he goes and has one with Jake Tapper. I do not forgive the news media for not investigating the claims of Anthony Fauci. The members of the news media who swallowed these lies, hook, line, and sinker, should also face prosecution for what they failed to do, because they are supposed to be the check against tyrannical authority. Did they act as a check against tyrannical authority during COVID? No, they did not. They were cheerleaders for people like Anthony Fauci, who have now been revealed to be the architects of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which killed at least 17 million people across the globe. Please feel free to substitute your own colorful language. So I've mentioned that Anthony Fauci has been a target of mine since my 2014 book with Dr. Judy Mikovits, Plague, One Scientist's Intrepid Search for the Truth About Human Retroviruses and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, Autism, and Other Diseases. So what you have to realize is that scientists like Fauci play a game. And we saw it most clearly with the proximal origin of COVID-19, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that embarrassment of a scientific publication, which was preceded by Fauci talking privately to a bunch of authors and saying, hey, you should write a paper and say that this virus came from nature, even though he knew something different. So why was I one of the first people to call out the lies of Anthony Fauci? Because of this book. So who were some of Fauci's willing henchmen in the crusade against Dr. Judy Mikovits, one of the most brilliant, honest, and ethical people I've ever had the privilege of knowing, but Dr. Ian Lipkin of Columbia University. So here's what Dr. Mikovits found. So to recap her XMRV investigation, what she discovered is that chronic fatigue patients, especially those who suffered from the disease for a long time, showed elevated rates of very rare cancers. Well, those very rare cancers were also known to be caused by viruses. Basically, it was a question of immune exhaustion. So what she had suggested is that maybe chronic fatigue syndrome patients had a retrovirus like HIV/AIDS, but instead of wiping out their immune system, what the virus was doing was wiping out the regulators of their immune system. And she believed that the virus could only be found intermittently in the bloodstreams of those who suffered, who were very severely ill. And so what she did was she took blood samples from a cohort of very sick chronic fatigue syndrome patients about every month or two, and then she would see if she could find evidence of a retrovirus. And she found it in about 67% of the sick population, only in about 3 to 4% of the normal population. So this was great. But the problem is it was a mouse retrovirus. And other scientists had said, oh my God, if this is a mouse retrovirus infecting people with chronic fatigue syndrome, where could that have come from? Well, they used mouse tissue in the creation of vaccines, most notably starting with a polio vaccine in the 1930s, an early polio vaccine put together by a researcher named Maurice Brody, was used on healthcare workers at Los Angeles County General Hospital in 1934 and 1935. And when did the first outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome happen? It happened among 198 doctors and nurses at Los Angeles County General Hospital from 1934 and 1935 who were working during the polio epidemic. So think about that. People are getting polio. You're coming in, they're coming in and you're treating them. You get this polio virus vaccine, and you get a different disease. Okay, so this goes along with the observation by many autism parents that their children were normal before a vaccine, but they were not normal after a vaccine. Well, if we look at what happened to those 198 doctors and nurses in 1934 at Los Angeles County General Hospital, and we compare it to what parents claim happened to their children with autism, we have a link. So Dr. Mikovits's work had to be shut down. Who was the henchman that Dr. Fauci had to bring in? Dr. Ian Lipkin of Columbia University, who's the same person who shut down Dr. Andrew Wakefield and his claim that the MMR vaccine was linked to the development of autism in certain children. So from my book on page 357, entitled The Lipkin Study. So let's talk. I'm simply going to read a little section, and you will see how Lipkin, with the backing of Dr. Anthony Fauci, I would say Fauci is the one who got this train started, went after these findings. Lipkin noted the papers of Mikovits and the confirmatory study of Harvey Alter of the National Institutes of Health and Shai-Ching Lo of the Food and Drug Administration. Lipkin also observed that while many commentators had suggested the Low Alter study should not be considered a confirmation, it was his opinion that, quote, the viruses discussed were somewhat different, but they readily fell into fairly similar classifications. It's not important to get into the details of viral taxonomy. It's simply important to say that these were retroviruses, that they were related, and they were distinctive in many ways. Many, but not all, groups were unable to replicate these findings, but Lipkin generously noted that none of them had the power to definitively refute the findings, nor did they offer the investigators an opportunity to use their best methods to answer the question. Quote, almost 2 years ago, with support from Francis Collins, director of the NIH, Anthony Fauci, director of the NIAID, Harold Varmus, director of the NCI, Peggy Hamburg, commissioner of the FDA, we initiated a study to look into this question in an absolutely clear-cut fashion, so I'm just going to be talking about it very briefly. From COVID, you know, that's the way these F-bomb scientists lie to you. They lie to you by dressing it up as an independent investigation. So 6 years ago, before any of you knew about Anthony Fauci and were lighting devotional candles to him, we had called him out as a criminal in this book. So don't feel bad that he pulled the wool over your eyes. The reason he didn't pull the wool over my eyes is because I'd investigated him. Okay. As COVID started to hit, this book, Plague of Corruption, was published. Notice, forward by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who at that time was probably the most censored individual on the planet. Also notice who else endorsed the book. Dr. Luc Montagnier, the winner of the Nobel Prize for the discovery of HIV. How much did we actually predict about the lies that would be told about COVID? Well, this book published in April of 2020. It should have published in November of 2019, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had not finished his foreword. What I had done, what I'd included in that book, was this cartoon from the cartoonist Ben Garrison. Notice it says, "Real science defenders." You have RFK Jr. with the torch of truth. You have Dr. Andrew Wakefield going after Fauci and Francis Collins. That's Francis Collins, who's in that garbage can. You have me, and you have Dr. Judy Mikovits. In the corner, slithering out like a snake, is Gavin Newsom. So this looked like prophecy to people, and it was. Not because I have God-given powers of discernment, but because when you investigate criminals, you realize they have a certain way that they act. You can predict future actions based on past actions. So let's read a little bit about Dr. Ian Lipkin again. So this question of XMRV would not go away. XMRV means xenotropic murine leukemia related virus. It's a leukemia virus from mice, which doesn't hurt the mice, but transfer to humans, give an immune challenge, and you might shut down your energy production systems. So continuing with another one of the criminals, Dr. Ian Lipkin, here's what was in our 2020 book. In September of 2013, that's 2 years after Dr. Mikovits had her reputation ruined, Dr. Ian Lipkin, the man who the previous year had supposedly debunked our findings of retroviral connection to ME/CFS, held an unusual public conference call. He had done further research with Dr. Jose Montoya of Stanford University, using a cohort of patients very similar to the one we used for the science paper, and the very cohort excluded from the 2012 study by Tony Fauci, head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Lipkin said, quote, "We found retroviruses in 85% of the sample pools. Again, it is very difficult at this point to know whether or not this is clinically significant." Are you F-bombing kidding me? You find evidence of a virus in 85% of the samples, and you don't know if that matters? Are you a moron? Are you an F-bomb moron? I think you might be. And given the previous experience with retroviruses and chronic fatigue, I'm going to be very clear in telling you, although I'm reporting this as present in Professor Montoya's samples, neither he nor we have concluded there is any relationship to disease. Got it? Even though he found retroviruses in 85% of the samples of the sick patients and in only 6% of the controls, he can't figure out if it means anything. And more shockingly, they're not going to do any further investigation. This is the nightmare of censored and dangerous science today. There are no data because the appropriate studies are forbidden and censored. That is what we have seen unfold with COVID-19. But for all of you at home who may not be of an age like me, or you may not have investigated these things, let me tell you what happened with COVID is the same exact thing which happened with HIV/AIDS. It is the same thing that happened with chronic fatigue syndrome. It is the same playbook they used in autism to destroy the reputation of Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And I am hopeful that with Rand Paul's questioning of Dr. Anthony Fauci, it will be clear that Fauci is not a scientist. He is a mass murderer. He is a mad scientist whose irresponsible experiments caused the death of at least 17 million people around the globe. Okay, so here's why people went crazy for this book in COVID. Remember, I wrote this book with Dr. Mikovits before COVID. I was talking about chronic fatigue syndrome and autism. But when I wrote about those two diseases and how the medical establishment did not want to accept any responsibility for the part they had played in the creation of those diseases, people saw in what we wrote as exactly what was unfolding with the COVID-19 epidemic, which was caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which was created in the Wuhan Institute of Virology based on American money and intellectual property. That's right. The reason China and the reason the United States don't want to admit this is they're both responsible. So don't just go hating on China. You got to talk about the US too. So here's one of the final passage I'm going to read from this book. So remember, this was published as all of you were locked down at home. This is why it got to number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, beating even Michelle Obama's book. How do you commit the perfect crime in science? We're handicapped from the start because it's a question we never ask. For more than 30 years, Frank taught me and many others to record our data accurately, compare them with collaborators around the world, discard the outliers, and come to a consensus. We understand there are variations, but if the bulk of the evidence goes in a certain direction, we are confident we have a better understanding of human biological processes. If only that were what happened in the real world. In the real world, there are corporations, be they pharmaceutical, agricultural, petroleum, or chemical companies that have billions of dollars at stake in the work of scientists. If one has billions of dollars, he can use the dark arts of persuasion to hire public relations firms to tout your products, Sow the seeds of doubt about those who question your products by advertising on news networks so they don't publicize negative stories unless they have no other choice, and donate to politicians of all ideologies. Then, once those politicians have been elected, they can write laws for the benefit of their generous donors. As it was put so eloquently in the 17th century by a prominent member of Queen Elizabeth's court, if it prospers, none dare call it treason. Against this financial and corporate juggernaut is the naive and inquisitive scientist. We are not taught to be fierce. We take no graduate courses in courage. We're encouraged to believe the raw data as long as all the experimental controls are used, and we report all of the data, even if we do not understand them. But when big money comes into the question, they use the dark arts people. So I'm here to tell you to think, to ask questions. Everybody should be watching Anthony Fauci tomorrow face questions from Rand Paul's committee. We need accountability for the 17 million people who died because of COVID. And I believe that can only be uncovered by getting Anthony Fauci to finally tell the truth. That's all I have for you today. Hopefully tomorrow you'll be watching Anthony Fauci answer questions. And if he doesn't, I hope he gets prosecuted. Because in my mind, there is no greater villain in the entire world than Anthony Fauci.